Hi, everybody. Kevin O'Shea and Brad Kruger, co-chairs of the Platform Council. There's a number of subjects that we're going to talk about today. Some industry update information, other information that would require input that I know that we're not going to get today because everybody's shy. But it's information that we would hopefully like you to consider if you have an interest in opinions on it, and then to communicate back with Brad and I on any thoughts on some of the information that we're going to present today. So the list today is, first of all, as some of you or most of you might be aware, we already have 3 separate tip sheets for mass climbing work platforms that were developed and issued through the SAIA's alliance with OSHA. Those 3 tip sheets dealt with safe use, ground conditions, and tying to the structure. And for about the last 6 or 9 months, we've been working on an additional 2 informational tip sheets. So we're going to just talk about them because we got them back from the R&R committee. There are only a couple of comments and a couple of clarifications that they wondered if we would want to look at and discuss, which we'll throw out for discussion and opinions over the next week or so, if that's the way that you would want to do it, to think about these things. Some of them are questions that you might want to think about and consider for a while. We're then going to go on to a little discussion about annual and frequent inspections. Then we're going to do a little bit of an update on the SAIA/IPAF collaboration and their agreement to collaborate on a number of things, which was touched on this morning when Forrest was presenting. We're then going to talk a little bit about transference from the mass climber into the building and vice versa. And then at the end, we're going to have some questions and comments and any other business. So that's kind of what we're going to go through. I guess I'm going to keep talking, and if Brad wants to say something, he's going to smack me on the back of the head. Is that the way it works?
I think that's what
yeah. Okay, that's what worked out.
And then you smack me.
Yeah, he's just going to smack me in the head when he wants to say something. Yeah. So I think we should move on to the first subject. And this would be the R&R committee's response on the tip sheet for duty of care. Okay. The first comment that they made was under the section of record keeping. As an owner of equipment, the question in the tip sheet is, do you have a history file for each mass climbing work platform containing last 3 years of annual inspections, required frequent inspections since the last annual inspection, and then details of any major repairs and a record of manufacturer's authorization for the major repairs. These are elements of the tip sheet content. And then details of any structural repairs and a record of manufacturer's authorization for those. So we'll come back to the major repair question that's highlighted in red. And the second comment that the R&R committee made was about general procedure section. Are you using proprietary replacement parts when replacing critical components? If not, do you have the manufacturer's permission to use an alternative? These are questions that come out of the tip sheet, and the tip sheets are designed to make owners of equipment think about their duty of care, their procedures, the behavior, the way that they run their business, and the way that they maintain their equipment. Are you periodically checking to verify with the user company that the daily/pre-use inspections will be completed and recorded? Are you periodically checking to verify with the user company that the personnel using the equipment are trained? Are you periodically checking to verify that there is no unauthorized use of the equipment on the job site? And again, these are just questions, and companies handle these different ways. For instance, Are you periodically checking to verify with the user company that the personnel using the equipment are trained? Tends to be maybe the sales guy going back for a repeat visit, make sure things are going okay. Sometimes they will spot other people on the platform who want training or who maybe require training. So there are different people in the supply chain who may perform these functions. The tip sheet is basically just throwing up the functions as maybe a way that you would consider to address some of your duty of care responsibilities as an equipment owner or major user. The R&R committee asked two questions. Should we define the term major repairs? And should we extend the sentence on critical components to include all components? Now, I think that might have been a manufacturer question, right? Because manufacturers would really like everybody to buy everything from them, right? And I get that. But there are components, and this is the discussion that we might want to have and have some input on over the next few weeks. There are components that may not be critical, that may not be, it might not even be something that a manufacturer sells. Manufacturers don't always sell everything for their equipment. So these are the questions that came back on the duty of care tip sheet. Some interesting questions from the R&R committee. And to throw it up for discussion and consideration to the group, we decided to do or look at other industry definitions of critical components and major repairs, right? And the question is, do we want to classify or do we want to basically interpret what a major repair is? And if so, what do we want to say about it? So if we want to do the first thing, then we need to think about what we call it on the second thing, right? And one of the definitions that I found was that a major repair is that if improperly done, might appreciably affect balance, structural strength, performance, power supply, load-bearing characteristics, or other qualities affecting safety and performance aspects, which could potentially lead to unsafe use. A bit of a mouthful, but once you start to get into looking at definitions, and remember, definitions lead you down the path of accidents and lawyers and legal interpretations. And that's a good reason for having them, but it's also a good reason for spending a lot of time trying to figure out what it should be, right? So the first question I would ask everyone to consider and to give Brad and I your input on over the next few weeks. Do we want to define what a major repair is on the tip sheet? And secondly, and now anyone who wants it can get a copy of this, obviously of the presentation to get the words, is that the kind of definition that would work? Or is it something else? Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting definition. James. Hold on, microphone. James. For the people online, James. And if you can say it in Scottish, please.
So I have to like have a mouthful of something when I speak.
You got to drop your IQ by 10 points, mate.
So I think the problem that I foresee with any of this is we're assuming that when we do these inspections that the cantilever decks remain the same from the day I inspect it to the day I put it on the next job or the next job or the next job. The problem I see is we have all these inspections set aside for a mast climber, and we reference the drive unit itself, the serial number on the drive unit. But if I set this mast climber up today as a, you know, let's say a single drive unit with a 16-foot deck on the left and a 16-foot deck on the right, and to do all this inspection on it, and my guy's over here repairing an 8-foot deck that I didn't have on there when I did the inspection. But he's done all this welding and repairing on this 8-foot deck, and then I send this thing out and say, oh, I only need a unit this long. I need a 16-foot on one side and an 8-foot on the other, and now I've got this 8-footer over there that's had all this work done to it, and there's no documentation to it.
I got it.
It's a subpart.
And to a certain extent, that's something we should think about. But I think one of the ways that I tended to think about this, and I'd run these kind of things through in my mind when I was reading this. And one of the things that was in my mind was to differentiate between a component and configuration, right? Because what you're describing is something I had previously thought about, and I thought it's actually a configuration of components. And so therefore, a major repair would be done to a component and not a configuration, right? And when I kind of defined it that way in my mind, it kind of took, because if you, for instance, if you put 5-foot decks on one side and 5 on the other side, right, and then you take 2 off and you take them away, the duty of care for those components is the same. You know, they just become part of the configuration. So, you know, in that sense, boiling it down to the component for that question, I think is the way that I was kind of looking at it. You know, like a drive unit, right? The superstructure around the drive unit, right? Clearly that would be a major component, right? And you're looking for wear and tear and rust and damage and all this other stuff, right? Rollers, right? I mean, all these things have an adverse effect if they don't function properly, right? So what we would ask is that if anybody has an opinion, and it's a really interesting question to ask, because the way things are going, right? The way things have been going for years is every accident that I've seen, every court case that comes up, every industry expert that calls you and is asked all these different questions, and every deposition I've ever been in, right? This is the kind of stuff they talk about. And this is the kind of stuff that either hangs you out to dry or not. So if we accept that the tip sheet is a useful piece of information, and if we accept the tip sheet has the phrase major repair in it, then
caulking tubes and caulking guns are required.
But I think that it's a worthwhile discussion to have in our industry and to get some input. There we go. So those 2 questions came up. Those were really the 2 main questions that came out of the R&R. I mean, everything else was kind of ANSI information added to the OSHA responsibilities, you know, so it kind of made sense. It makes sense to us here, right? Because we do it and we're kind of trying to push it, right? But I'm thinking about equipment owners, I'm thinking about rental companies, you know, this kind of thing. If somebody said, you know, what do I need to do to be compliant? You know, and we now have a situation where we can say, there's 5 tip sheets, start there, right? You know, and it's going to then influence their procedures and the way they do their business, you know, and at the end of the day, it's going to help us in this room, right? The manufacturers especially, because the better the product performs, the better the report comes back from the industry that it's a good thing, right? It's a good piece of kit, right? You know, so and you know and I know, right? Whether it was our fault or whether it wasn't, when a machine falls over, you're still getting sued, right? So, you know, the question is, how do we influence the duty of care in the industry? Well, one of the very few ways we can do it is to go through the SCIA as a vehicle, as a members organization, and introduce information that people might, think about, use, and build into procedures for their own business, So in that sense, the tip sheets will be very useful. They are very useful. I use them in every training session at the moment, right? And they're very valuable. So now that we've got the 5 of them proposed, we're going from the job hazard, right, the analysis, to safe use, ground conditions, tying to the structure, and duty of care, right? Almost the rental life cycle, right, or the use life cycle. So there's some good information in there, and I think it will continue to be good. But these are just a couple of questions that I think are quite big questions.
Just quickly, and to Kevin's point, that again, the reason for these tip sheets, which we're hoping there's already 3 in place, and with these additional couple is just to bring a higher level of safety to our industry. But the intent is just to give users, owners, you name it, whoever's related to mast climbers, good, useful information. Just to repeat what Kevin said, that's all we're trying to. These are excellent points, because these couple of areas, critical components and major repairs, the goal is not to create any more exposure for all of us in the industry. So if we can limit that exposure from a liability perspective, but yet make available to everyone in the industry useful documents, then it's a win-win for everybody.
Okay, I got one thing here on tip sheets in general. Maybe it's just a point of view, maybe perspective, whatever you want to call it. But in my opinion, tip sheets are designed to get to the end users out there on the ground who have the least amount of experience with any given product, whether it's a scaffold tip sheet, whether it's a swing stage tip sheet, whether it's a whatever tip sheet you want to call it. My opinion is a tip sheet designed for annual inspections is something that's going to be targeting an owner who's already got experience with this equipment. He's already got certified mechanics. He's already got people following a certain maintenance schedule. So trying to give a annual inspection tip sheet is really kind of counterproductive.
Yeah.
In my opinion, we should maybe go into a second tip sheet about inspection of daily inspection or weekly inspection, and the difference of the two, to give the end user a little more, hey, there's another tip sheet that talks about checking cantilevers and their connections. Here's another tip sheet just telling me to look at that ground condition one more time, instead of going into something about mechanicals that they're probably just going to be scratching their head about anyway. So I don't know that an annual inspection tip sheet is where we need to direct our time at.
Let me just clarify that. We're not proposing an annual inspection tip sheet, right? What we're proposing is a duty of care tip sheet that is going to ask the question, James, do you know what your inspection intervals are, and are you doing them, right? So it's a duty of care tip sheet that goes into, the maintenance side, the record keeping, anything that might be required, but not specifically detailing what an annual inspection would be, okay? Because you're right, that already exists, and that's a manufacturer specific document, yeah? But the general question is, are you performing those at
So
those
it's kind of a tip sheet to tell you to use your, I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. If it comes back,
Never mind.
if it comes back, signal Brad and he'll smack me on the head.
Manual of responsibilities. That's what I was trying to think of.
Yeah.
It's sort of a tip sheet to tell you to use your manual of responsibilities.
And one of the other values of the tip sheets is that a lot of equipment owners have a very finite lifespan when it comes to reading, right? They don't like to read the lot of regulations, but they're bound by them many times, right? And so the tip sheets basically are a clarification of what they should already know, but they don't have time to read, right? On many occasions. It's the industry saying, here's what we found has saved lives, or here's what we have found has extended the life of the equipment, or here's what we have found in procedures that if you adopt them, you will run your business successfully and cover your backside at the same time, right? They might not, if you look at how many people buy the ANSI 92.9, right? You can look at the number and then look at who's buying them. And the answer is most of them have been purchased by attorneys, right? Because they're the ones that are really going to read them. Yeah. So it's good guidance is what it's designed to be, I think. Okay. So those are questions, those are considerations. And I would ask that everybody think, Mike, do you have
just one more quick thing on these tip sheets. And I'm sure a lot of people in this room that do training probably do this, but we take those tip sheets and other ones from our industries and we give them to our customers, and we developed one for mast climbing too for toolbox meetings.
Mhm.
Because these guys do toolbox meetings every Friday, so we can break them up a
Yep.
lot more.
Yep.
And it's still being showed, and it's
Yeah.
repeat. So,
And hopefully one of these times it'll stay in there. Yeah.
well, you hope.
Okay.
Kevin,
Yep, somebody?
expanding on what these gentlemen have said, the tip sheets, they have other purposes. First off, they're available online, so you can point people to it. There are safety directors, other people in the company that are not using the equipment that need to know. And so the more people that we can get the information in the hands of, the better off we are. And the smaller the document, the more chance it is of being read.
Well, one of the things I've always used in training is you can only trust an operator or a user with one sheet of paper, right? You know, I mean, front and back, and that's it, you're done. Give them any more than that, and they've lost a half of it by the time they start the first 10 minutes of the shift, right? So, you know, there are realities, you know, that as you point out. Going on to and this was the final comment over the 2 tip sheets. This is a question on mast attachment. This comes from the job survey, okay, which is, you know, the salesperson or the operational person walking the job, deciding what equipment, what configuration, what length, if it's single, if it's twin, if it's whatever, what the ground conditions are, stability is going to be, what they're tying to, in order to put together a price. Yeah. And the problem with that always is that if they don't know what they're doing, they put together a price that becomes impossible to negotiate up from, if you find anything out, right? We all know that story, right? Now, a section to do with mast attachment asks various questions. How will the mast be attached to the structure? What will the tie intervals be? Are there reinforcement / post-tension cables present in the slab, which could affect anchor depth or location? Will the parapet detail affect the ability to use it for an anchor position if it's required? Has the strength of any parapet used? So all these questions are part of a checklist that someone who's doing a job hazard analysis walking the job would hopefully consider. And the R&R committee came back and said, should we add a question about the manufacturer's tie and tie interval recommendations in that? And coming back to what, James, what you were touching on just a little while ago about referencing another document, yeah? We're suggesting that we don't need to add a question in this tip sheet because there already exists a full OSHA Alliance tip sheet on tying to the structure. So the information is in another one of the 5 tip sheets already. So it would just be duplication. And what it says in the existing authorized Alliance tip sheet right now for tying to the structure is consult the manufacturer's manual for maximum tie distance and tie forces. Remember that tie forces are calculated by the manufacturer based on distance between ties, distance between the ties and the structure, the configuration of the platform, the load on the platform, wind speed, etc. Tie forces required to be assessed for the exact configuration and other influencing factors. So there's already quite comprehensive language in the tying to the structure tip sheet. I don't think it needs to be repeated again. So my suggestion would be, unless anyone has any objection, that we go back to the R&R committee and suggest that we don't need to elucidate any further on this issue in this new tip sheet. So now we have once we finalize, we will have a finalized job survey tip sheet, our already produced and published SAI OSHA Alliance ground conditions tip sheet, tying to the structure, safe use, and if we agree on the duty of care, that would be the 5. Safe use is also available in Spanish and Portuguese. So for information, I would suggest it's quite a comprehensive little library of stuff for equipment owners and users to be able to use. Okay, annual frequent inspections, and this is a question. Another question that might provide some discussion. Okay. In 92.9 and 7.4.5, it defines what a frequent inspection is. And 7.4.6 talks about the annual inspection. We all know this, right? Anybody who's got the ANSI standard has seen this. So right now, the booms and scissors industry are introducing an annual inspection decal on its equipment. As Brad will testify, on booms and scissors, it's more or less par for the course. So the question is, do we want to do it for manufacturers of mast climbers? Just a simple question for that. For the I'm inclined to want to do it, and the reason I'm inclined to want to do it is because I'm fed up getting GCs calling me and asking for inspections, right? When they seem to place their faith on the decal. It's one of the first things they look for when the booms and scissors go on the job site, you know. So, but I'm not. It's not really my opinion that matters here today. It's what everybody thinks about that, you know. And again. If it's something that is an idea, is a good idea for mass climbing work platforms and probably transport platforms, right? Let's talk about them in this case. Then do we provide an industry decal outline? In other words, do we as an industry say, you can do what you want, you don't have to buy it from the manufacturer, but if you're going to put one on your equipment, here's the information that you might want to have on it. Right, and give them some guidance. So again, an interesting question. I think it's probably one that's coming, right? I mean, I was talking to a guy called Bernie Kiekebusch, who used to be the chairman of the Australian Rental Association down there. And they've been doing this stuff for quite a while now, okay, in Australia. I don't mean on mast climbers, but on the rental business itself. They really grabbed a hold of these annual inspection decals at a very early stage of development, and it's a big thing for them. And it certainly, on booms and scissors in this country, it certainly seems to be the way to go. And most of the booms and scissors will now contain annual inspection decals. So again, question, is it a good idea? And if it's a good idea, do we want to provide some kind of format of information, style even, for owners of equipment who may want to use, who may want to have locally produced their own annual inspection decals, or should they come from the manufacturer? Open questions.
Kevin, as we debate this over the next few weeks or whatever, and send emails back and forth pertaining to our business and particularly mast climbers. So would this just be for the power units, or would it be for bridges, even towers, or what? Because as you know, that would be damn near impossible for.
That's a question, right? The question, the way I look at that is, if it has a serial number, then probably.
Well,
Right?
I think your towers, just like mine, have batch numbers. They don't have
Yeah, they
individual.
do.
serial
Batch numbers are not, but
So,
the platform sections, right, or bridges, right,
right.
mostly
They
have serial numbers, right, in the industry, right? And if they don't, it might still be a case in point, right? Because there's a lot of importance behind a platform, right, and a drive unit, right? If those two
Right.
things don't work, then you can forget about worrying about the rest, right?
Exactly.
So again, but that's a question, you know, this is part of the debate. Is it drive unit, or is it drive unit and bridges, or is it anything that's serial numbered, or what is it, you know? So again, if you got a boom lift, you got a boom lift, right? But that's not what we have.
But the reason I said that was mainly because, you know, power units are very important to us, and so are the bridges, but the backbone of it is the tower, you know? The tower fails, or the stiff arm fails,
Yeah.
then the whole thing's gonna fail. So
And-
where do we stop, or
and
where do
that's-
we begin?
That's I mean, I'm only asking the question because
I get it.
it's a question that I get asked from general contractors, right? I've had it a number of occasions. Why has that not got an annual inspection sticker on it, right? Because they see it on booms and scissors. And I would give them an answer much like the one that you've just given, right? But I'm just asking the question, you know? I mean, what's the point in us coming here and not thinking, right?
Oh, I respect all of it, and,
Yeah.
and I think it's something we should be debating, but
Yeah.
I think it's something we have to be really clear about, because
Yeah, and
I
think
know
that-
how much equipment Hydromobile has out there. I mean, bridges alone, I wouldn't be afraid to say you have 15,000 bridges plus, you know?
and that's the question, right? And the other question is then, you know, who designs it? Is it an industry design? You know, I think you have to start with, do we need it, right? And if we decide we need it for what, right? Component wise. And if we decide that and define that, it's okay, how is it made available, you know? So again, another interesting discussion to have. And I think it's a discussion that we should have, you
know? I would say that and it's a very valid point, but any piece of equipment that requires an annual inspection, our mast climbers require an annual inspection. For those, and I'm sure that everyone in this room would agree that for those that are doing a consistent quality annual inspection, that we should welcome something like this within the industry. Those that are not probably wouldn't welcome it. And that's what we're trying, Kevin mentioned, and I know we've said it in a few of our presentations, we're trying to level the playing field to keep our industry safer. So we all compete with each other, but we want safe equipment out there in the market. And if we're all doing consistent quality inspections, identifying that those inspections have been done is not a bad thing. I think it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, thank you. You know, so, and that's another important point, right? We all consider ourselves to be pioneers of the mast climber industry, right? In this room, right? We're really involved in it. Pioneers get shot, right? You know, and so, you know, we need to we need to look after ourselves, right? And by the only way that we can really do that is to influence safe use of our equipment in the industry. So it's all driven to the same thing. So, but they're important questions because they have connotations and they have alternative connotations, right? Depending on who's talking and who's reading, right? So it's just all important discussion stuff that hopefully we'll get some emails back so that we can kind of work it through. And then once we get that, we'll come back out with the general opinions for debate. And I mean, it's not going to be a 2-minute deal, but I think it's important to begin the discourse, you know. The next thing I want to talk about was something that Forrest talked a little bit about this morning, and that is that the Scaffold and Access Industry Association and the International Powered Access Federation, IPAF, have signed an agreement to work together to promote safety and training in powered access throughout the US, Canada, and Mexico. The agreement will also focus on joint promotion of standards, as well as sharing knowledge and disseminating best practice, informing and influencing national safety and regulatory bodies with a unified voice, and promoting the need for effective powered access operator and supervisor training. I really think this is great. Apart from anything, it's going to save me a bunch of money and time having to go to IPAF and the SAIA and all these different events, because I think at the end of the day, it's going to bring them to work closer together. And maybe even have meetings, not in the same room, but in, you know, the same venue. The industry needs a bigger voice, I think, internationally and domestically. And I think the right thing here, and I said this to Mike, it's absolutely correct that the SAIA has got all the cards in this relationship in North America, right? You know, the OSHA Alliance and the Secretariat of the ANSI standards are really, really important. And they are the emphasis and the basis on which this thing should move forward, supported by the International Powered Access Federation. If it was in Europe, I might be saying it the other way around, you know. Both organizations are very strong in certain geographical territories, but essentially for the same products, right? And let's not kid ourselves. Some of the people who are sitting on, you know, are sitting on both committees, right? Or involved in both organizations. I'm an example of that, right? I'm the chairman of the IPAF International Mast Climber Committee, precisely because there are only 5 people worldwide in the mast climber industry, I think, right? And they're all here, right? Or most of them are. So it's an interesting industry. It's a smaller industry to get our head around in the booms and scissors industry, but it's not, there's nothing to detract from it right there. It's a hugely important industry, and it becomes more important every day. And we've got international equipment coming here, and we're sending equipment over there, maybe not in huge numbers, but sometimes in significant numbers. and they have different operating characteristics. They're working to different standards. We're running to 92.9, they're running to 1495, the European norm, right? And then they've got a safe use standard in the UK called BS 7981. So they've got all these, there's all these standards. Now, Shannon, I think you'll probably know this, but most of them read almost exactly alike, right? And that's because there are 5 of us in the industry and we all write them. But you know, that's as much of an advantage as anything, right? Because we get a chance to do, you know, quality supply of a mass climbing work platform in the UK is no different from quality supply in the US for that reason, right? And that is an advantage, absolutely right there. So one of the things that we decided to do on the IPAF International Committee, and we're going to meet probably end of May, beginning of June, right? And I talked to IPAF about this, but we're talking about an informal invitation to 2 members of the SAIA Mass Climbing Fraternity to join the next international meeting as guests, just to hear what goes on. And then if the inclusion goes well, then the international committee would propose 2 permanent slots for SAIA members to come in and take part in and listen to and join in on the IPAF International Committee and have any debates that they're having. And the reason I want to bring it up today is because I think there's probably some more mileage in that somewhere for other possibilities. And we would very much like to hear from anyone who thinks or who does come up with maybe other ways in which we can collaborate. There are ways that it's already being very useful, because right now, one of the things that the SAIA has is an absolutely fantastic relationship with OSHA through the Alliance. And the idea for IPAF's collaboration would be to support that alliance with whatever they can bring to the table to help. Yeah. So what you have is you have an extremely successful alliance now bolstered by an international industry which kind of works with the same type of equipment in the same way, and there's collaboration. I don't know what could be wrong with that, you know, at the end of the day. I think it's a very good thing. And I think that it's interesting from the point of view of safety related information, analysis of accidents that happen. I'm going to talk about one in a minute that will be a prime example of that. Some of you may know about it, the accident, but I'll come to it shortly, and we'll analyze it just to make you aware. But first of all, we have another question to answer. A lot of questions today, right? And we will make sure you get a copy of the presentation because all the questions are here. Yeah. Just try to keep you busy. Maybe what we should have done was had a crate of beer and then answered them. We'd been here for a week. But okay, background to where we are, 1970 Occupational Safety and Health Act, I guess signed by Richard Nixon on the 29th of December, 1970. And out of that came Subpart L, which is our main area of consideration in the mass climber side, supported scaffold. Mass climbing work platform is right now a supported scaffold, but without a sub-classification. There is no sub-classification for mass climbers at that point. A929 is not incorporated by reference. It is in subsection or appendix C to 1926-453, which calls it a non-mandatory consensus standard, which is about as helpful as I don't know what, right? So what that obviously leads to is interpretation. Because OSHA is not clear, and when there's a violation or a potential violation, OSHA might not be clear, right? And what it's going to lead to is interpretation. Interpretation of what? Manufacturer's manual, 92.9, any number of things may come in. So it's a kind of fluid situation, but it's been fluid since 1970, right? When the OSHA Act was signed, right? Hold on, microphone. Can we have our glamorous assistant with the microphone, please?
Open seat right there. What year was it that, I mean, what was it, 15 years ago, maybe, that you and I did that presentation at OSHA
Mhm.
Direct in Washington DC,
Yeah,
and they
National
said
Gallery of
they were
Art.
5 years away from having a standard? What was that, 15 years ago?
Yes, probably. I think you were about 60. Yeah. Feel like it.
You're
Feels
a
like
little
it.
older than me.
Well, it's just so that everybody, what he's referring to is, we actually took ACOSH on a field trip that day, right?
Right.
They don't have the budget for much, right? So what we did was we marched them across the street from the Francis Perkins building up there in DC, and we took them to a job site, which was the National Gallery of Art, where the external fabric of the building, which was 17,600 panels of Louisiana pink marble, Tennessee pink, was all being replaced, because not the building, but the envelope of the
The anchor
building is a
points.
registered national work of art.
Mhm.
Okay. And they only had how many panels down there spare?
I can't remember, to be honest
It
with
wasn't a lot.
you. No.
So they were trying to make sure they didn't break any panels. They had to
Yeah.
remove them all, repair the fabric or the support network behind the panels, the steel frame, and then put it back on. And you guys were working on the building with the mast climbers, and I think you had transport platforms on there too, or hoists
Yeah.
or something. And we took ACOSH in its entirety over there. Politically correct, of course, they refused any donuts because it would have been a bribe. But they did take the coffee, and it was very successful. I mean, we had the whole of ACOSH and some senior OSHA people in the room, and the GC, and we went through the mast climbers in some detail. And I thought we got a very fair hearing. What came out of that at the end of the day was that we got the tip sheets, and the Alliance tip sheets kind of appeared. The other interesting part behind that, right, is that gave us the go-ahead to go and do a kind of tour, right, where within each region of OSHA, we started region 1 and then went through them all. We took a mast climber or two there, and we had OSHA people crawling all over it, asking all the questions. We showed them what quality operator training should look like.
And they still know nothing.
Yeah, what's that?
I said they still know nothing
Well,
about our mass climbers.
There are some of them that do. I mean, what we wanted was everybody to pick up the ball and run with it, right?
Right.
What we got like a local expert maybe in each area, right? And those guys still exist, right? But that was better than what we had.
I think Mike is retired long ago by now.
Yeah.
Hey,
Well-
Kevin, this is Ron Sokol. One of the things that you are able to get through that, and just to kind of build upon what you're saying, is that when you do things like that, that also brings in NIOSH. And of course, Dr. Chris Pan from NIOSH Center in Morgantown did so much research on mast climbers and the stresses on them from fall protection and fall arrest. So, continuing to be able to educate OSHA also allows you to educate NIOSH, which then in turn allows you to access research funding dollars to be able to help the industry that way. So please don't overlook that important aspect, because NIOSH was created to be the research arm basically for OSHA. So thank you.
Yeah, Ron, good point. And it's worth mentioning to the people here, and Shannon will tell you this, because Frackle have interfaced with Chris and Brian Weimer, the project manager for a lot of that work. In fact, I'll tell you, it was so long ago when I had my first talk, I spoke to all of the NIOSH staff to kind of set this whole thing up many years ago. And at that time, I wasn't an American citizen, so they wouldn't let me through security. I had to do it in the foyer, right? But I'm okay now. I'm a citizen now, so I can get through. But yeah, those guys have been great, especially Brian Weimer and Chris Pan have been great, and they've helped us with a lot of work. And currently, I think they're still helping actually on the beginnings of some analysis of scaffold guardrail heights. So the work still continues, and it's a great relationship. Great relationship.
Kevin, this is Dave Glabe. I have a question for you. This thing's been going on for quite some time, right? About the mast climber being a supported scaffold.
Yeah.
Obviously doesn't agree with the ANSI standards. Isn't it about time that the SAIA make some sort of a statement, some sort of a policy statement that explains exactly what a mast climber is, irrespective of how the OSHA regulations are applied by OSHA, and at least that way we'll have a document that people can use and understand as to what is the most important aspects of the regulations and what is the most important thing about the standards that relate directly to a mast climber.
Yeah, Dave, I think that's a really good point. It kind of dovetails into something I was saying earlier there about, you know, there's information out there that equipment owners either choose not to read or they lose interest a quarter of the way through. But clarifications are absolutely the case. The tip sheets are part of that, but the scope, for instance, and some of the stuff out of ANSI would be very useful.
Well, we need a policy statement because people, I mean, they ask me, you know, what's going on. And I explained to them that, well, the OSHA regulations are regulations and the OSHA compliance folks have to deal with that end of it. But in safe operation, use, maintenance, and all the other things we're talking about here, you know, is that it's the ANSI standards that are obviously much, much superior. So therefore, a policy statement from the association, I think, would go a long way towards clarifying it and also clarifying for the OSHA compliance officers.
And I think that's Mike and the group's consideration at that point, whether you would want to do that. Certainly, any kind of clarification and along those lines, as Dave has alluded to, would be very valuable. I think as long as it didn't kind of crawl all over the quiet work that's being done on the ANSI standard side to try and get a movement on this, you know.
Oh, no doubt about it. It has to be in coordination. I'm not suggesting we stomp on anybody, but
yeah,
there's a void here, and we have the opportunity, and as the voice of the industry, is that we have the opportunity to clarify it for everybody. Yeah, and I think it would, you know, certainly help out the OSHA folks. It helps out safety people. It, you know, helps out suppliers. It helps out everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, if Mike and the group have no objections, I think we could set ourselves a task of looking at defining along those lines and see if there's something that we would want to throw out, you know.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dave.
You bet.
And here's something, and this is a question again, right? I'm asking questions today, right? Brad and I debated these for quite some time already. But if you go to 1926, 451, there's certain language in there about being 14 inches away or less from the face of the work, 18 inches if you're plastering or lathing, and the use or not of guardrails. And there is another language in there with scaffold platforms of plus or minus 2 feet above or below, sorry, less than 2 feet above or below a point of access. There seems to be language that says you can transfer onto the structure as long as that machine is, you know, plus or minus less than 2 feet off the structure and 14 inches or less away or 18 inches from the plastic. This is stuff that keeps getting regurgitated back every time that we have a safety issue on a job site. Somebody will say, but it says I can do it, right? And I'm not saying that you can or you cannot do it. Not for me to say that you can or you cannot do it, but it's another discussion, right? And there's a reason for the discussion, okay? There is other language in OSHA. Employer must instruct each employee in recognition and avoidance of unsafe conditions, okay? Eliminate any hazards. Competent person, right? Part of that competent person's job, right, is to prevent, recognize hazards, okay? So when does transference from a machine onto a building become a hazard? And when does it become a recognized hazard? And who should have known about it? And when does it become not a hazard? This has been a question for years. Yeah? And the only reason that I bring it up is that there have been recorded fatalities where people have tried to either step from a machine onto the structure or vice versa. And whether they were authorized to be able to even be on the machine was a case in point and a couple of those instances. But the big point is there is the question of transference. Now, ANSI in the scope describes a mast climbing work platform as primarily used to position personnel. The word position is important. What dilutes it is primarily. So even that's not really absolutely clear, okay? So transference, if it is to take place, and in many instances it has, right? There's nothing wrong with it in our industry. But should the industry clarify when it can be necessary to do so, how it should be managed, who should develop the procedure, what should be considered in the risk assessment? Now, one of the reasons why this is going to become a more of a talking point in the future is that the new ANSI suite of standards 2.0, 2.2, and 2.4 for MUPs, mobile elevating work platforms, facilitate the exit and entry into the raised basket of a scissor or a boom on a job site. And in that language is a kind of description of the considerations that one should make in the analysis of the risk that you're in the action that you're performing. Okay. So we've done it, right? We know how to carefully manage it as an industry. The booms and scissors industry are now facilitating it in booms and scissors, but with language in the new suite of ANSI standards. So the question is, do we feel, and again, it's a question, input please if you don't mind, but do we as an industry feel we need to comment on it? Do we need to feel in light of that information that we need to further address it? And if we do, what do we want to do about it? Or do we want to do nothing? So again, another question. But the questions that we're raising today, I think, are important questions. Okay. I talked a little bit about the International Committee of IPAF and the SAIA committee working together to kind of talk about stuff, collaborate. This is a real tragedy. A double fatality just recently in Zaragoza in Spain. The two dead individuals were a technician from the Resti Rentals, or I guess Northeast Rentals, and one other, the operator. The GC was Dragados, and it was on the Torre Zaragoza project. Rental company at the same Resti. The machine type was an Aller PM200 single mast, and importantly was a redundant drive machine. For those of you who don't regularly hear the phrase, you either have a drive motor and an overspeed brake, or the other way that machines will be used is to have two drive motors, one being a redundant drive. In other words, should the drive fail, the initial drive motor fail, you have the secondary. Okay, and its ability to obviously brake and to bring you to ground safely, all of these things. This was a redundant drive unit. The machine had been slipping on the mast, according to the operator, when the machine stopped and the brakes were applied. So there'd be power release spring applied, and they said that the machine was slipping a little bit. The operator was on the machine. The technician from the Resti stood on the machine. They started to look around at what was going on, and it free fell 70 feet. The technician was dead at the base of the unit. The operator died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Tragic. I bring it up not for anything else than just to inform you that it happened, but also to remind anyone, to remind their customers or owners of the equipment. We're certainly going to go out and do it with owners of our equipment. If you have a redundant drive unit, or even if you have a drive motor and an overspeed, right? Whatever one you have, just a reminder out there to say there are specific defined inspection criteria for either type of drive. And it's absolutely vital that they are serviced by a qualified person at the intervals that the manufacturer dictates. You know, 10 years ago, there was a Lend-Lease job in Spain, Madrid, Banco Sadibel, where a twin mast unit from a Spanish manufacturer, a twin mast unit, one side of it slipped down the mast. Okay. Now what happens at that point is it gets jammed in between the masts, right? Because the unit that's still up here and the other one falls, gets jammed in between, right? So there's less chance that it's going to collapse, except on this occasion, the tie intervals were in excess of the manufacturer's requirements. So what does that do? It reduces the strength between the ties of the mast and the mast on the side where it fell, snapped in two. And then the whole thing fell to the ground, 2 fatalities. So this stuff happens in the industry, thankfully rarely. But when it does, I think it's incumbent on us to bring it out to our members, to take out to the owners of the equipment, just to put a little bit extra emphasis on what they're doing, to make sure that we're reminding them that to do the right thing, you know. So as I say, I bring it up as information. Sad to have to bring it up, but I think it's important just to bring and to highlight it. Another discussion. Last one, I promise you. Right?
We have more questions and answers.
Yeah, and we have to ask these questions, right? All we're doing is bringing questions to you from stuff that's come back to us from GCs or safety professionals or regulators. I'm not saying that somebody who's under 18 shouldn't be on the equipment. It's not the question we're asking. What we're asking is, as an industry, should we train and certify under 18 workers as operators or installers? Now, let me give you a bit of background to this, okay? There have been cases in the past where there have been accidents and underage workers have been on the equipment, unknown to the rental company, unknown to the owner of the equipment, but just, operators from a local company on the job. They bring in a new worker. That new worker maybe is under 18 years of age and there's an accident, okay? It sometimes becomes a different question when you've got an underage worker on the unit. So if we go to the FLSA, right, the Fair Labour Standards Act, what does it say? Well, it kind of came out at the same time as the 1978 OSHA Act, or very close to it, I think. And it says individuals who are 16 or 17 may work in non-hazardous occupations. Occupations deemed hazardous in the same document, for which 18 years old is the minimum age, includes the phrase power-driven hoisting apparatus, which is probably all that existed when they wrote it, right? Mass climbers, I'm sure, didn't exist when this piece of paper was produced. Already, I can tell you that many companies, including access companies, are very careful about hiring under 18 workers. Industry training bodies have language prohibiting the training of under 18. And I can tell you now that IPAF has a clause in there in Europe where they will not train and certify an under 18. So again, the question, and this, I think there's an industry question, but there's also an SAIA question, which is the language is unclear, like it always is. Is there a position that either the industry should take or have an opinion on when it comes to the training and certification of under 18 workers?
I'm pretty sure the insurance company's already made that answer.
You know, it's amazing. Before coming here, I talked to a number of people I kind of, who I thought might have an opinion on it. And some of them were clear and others were about as unclear as what you see on the screen. Right? So the answer is those who have had to deal with it post-accident or incident are probably more expert on it than anybody else, right? But anybody who would be considered an expert who's not going through the process has difficulty expressing an opinion on it. That's kind of where it is out there and the people that I talked to before I came here, So again, it's another important question that as an industry, we don't have to deal with it immediately, or we can if we want, or it's up to, all we're doing right now is stimulating discussion on, I think, a number of really important points that we need to think about. Whatever we decide to do as an industry or as an association, it's whatever we decide to do. But we can't do it without input, So opinions are really important on all of this stuff. Is there any other business or discussion from anybody? Barney, do the microphone, mate.
Sorry. Mr. O'Shea, I meant to ask you before, in Europe, are they doing the annual inspections with the sticker?
Some of them do. You've got a different inspection regimen. They've got a 6 weekly inspection over there. you know, so, but I can tell you that the big rental companies that I talk to have a sticker, and it combines the 6 weekly and the annual generally, right? So, and no, there's no one format, you know, there's no one format. But in the main, it's something that gets used, yeah. Any other questions?
So I just, in closing, thank you, Kevin, and hopefully that was useful. To Kevin's point, these discussions to bring awareness to these issues so we can be proactive as opposed to reactive when accidents happen. As far as the tip sheets, if you could get that information back or your thoughts back to us as quickly as possible. I think those have been in the works for quite a while now, so we'd like to get those to the finish line. But I'd like to, and I think we all owe Kevin a big thank you for the work that he's done on those, well, for all the work he's done, but a big thank you on the tip sheets themselves. I know he's put a lot of time and effort into the 3 that we have and the 2 that we hope to have very soon. So thank you for that, Kevin. But these resources they're only useful if we use them. So we encourage you to please, they're very easy to find. I hope everyone knows where to find them. Make sure they just don't stay in this room. Let's encourage our people to use them and make our industry safer. So thank you. Appreciate everyone's time.
Last point, I did mention the International Mast Climber Committee. If anyone would, and there are 2 spots there. Now, I'm not one because I'm a chairman, right? So if there is anyone who would like to sit in on that and just listen in here, then please let me know or let Brad know, and we'll see how many come back. I think we might look at, you know, if it goes well, it might be something we can reciprocate on, you know, and ask them to come and join us too, just as a way to just primarily establish a level of communication. But if anybody wants to be on that in one of those 2 spots, just let either Brad or I know, and we'll get together with you. Okay? And if we're done, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you both.
We're going to take a short break and be back here at 3:30 p.m. for the suspended council session, Eastern time. Thank you.